What's up? This is a total natural answering of the phone.
Supernatural, regular day of you guys just FaceTiming me over the computer and also recording the audio.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're really great at natural quarantine pod.
This is FaceTime episode number 2, Danny.
FaceTime with books.
FaceTime with books.
It's been 2 weeks since the last episode, which in Rona time is approximately 2 months.
700,000 years. We've all aged just immensely in the last 2 weeks.
Rona time is a real thing.
It's real.
But yeah, we're glad to be back at it with the back half of Sing Unburied Sing. But in the meantime, we're going to talk about a couple things. This is a very momentous episode. First of all, it is episode 20.
Hey.
Which is exciting. We now have a website, beertimewithbooks.podbean.com. We are on Spotify. We're on Apple Podcasts.
Hell yeah.
We have an Instagram. Surprise, we have a Twitter.
We have a logo. Did we talk about the logo last time?
No logo. There was no logo last time.
No logo. Yeah, we got a logo now. Shout out Kara Frayne.
Kara Frayne Designs.
Hell yeah, Kara Frayne. Follow her on Instagram. She's great.
Yeah, so
Frayne.
Yeah, check the pod out on all the platforms. This is something we've been talking about since day one. It took like a good
Brian got quarantine productive.
Yeah.
And just went hard on getting them all up on the platforms.
Yeah, so they are up there. We are super pumped about that, and also yeah, we've been living the quarantine life, so we have a couple beers that we had to run out to the grocery stores to get. Luckily, the beer stock was still fine out there. So let's go ahead and go around and talk about what we're drinking. Who wants to start?
I can start. I'm drinking a KC Beer Co. Hefeweizen, which is a Bavarian-style wheat ale. It's good. It's pretty sweet. I'm Jamie. Hi.
It's pretty sweet, as in taste, or just like it's sweet, man.
Both. It has a subtle sweetness to it, like compared to other wheat beers.
Definitely. Danny, what are you drinking this fine quarantine evening?
I've got another tart apple radler. Not quite summer vibes, but I mean maybe. It looks like we're gonna be inside all spring, so trying to feel a little summery. I'm gonna do a little ASMR.
Nice.
The ASMR.
I love that came through the FaceTime. Great.
Yeah, the ASMR through FaceTime is a whole new experience of nice computery echo, which is a good thing. And then for me, this is Brian. I'm also having a KC Beer Co. Hefeweizen. And yeah, it does have a sweet kick to it, which is very unique, at least for what I was expecting for wheat, because we've been having some of the Boulevard Unfiltered for a couple episodes. We also have some in the fridge right now. But I would say that is not sweet, and this definitely corners a different part of the wheat market. So, yeah, pretty good. And now we also have had plenty of quarantine time for media. So, again, we'll try to keep it semi-compressed here. If you want to do like a list of some short things or deep dive on one and list out a couple, whatever floats your boat. But we'll pass it back around. Jamie, what media have you been consuming in the quarantine?
Honestly, most of the media I'm consuming is the same as last time. I am still listening to the audiobook for The Sympathizer. And I've gotten into it now. I think last time I had listened to like a chapter of it and I wasn't sure about it, but I do like it. I'm about halfway through. I've listened to like 8 hours or something.
A classic beer time with books, about halfway.
About halfway. So I'm still listening to that. I'm enjoying it. I'm also still reading The Buried Giant by Kazuo Ishiguro. Still enjoying that. I'm also about halfway through that. So I'm consistent in how I'm moving through those. The only thing that's new, I guess, that I've consumed. I mean, okay, 2 things. First thing is a podcast that I started listening to this week that is hosted by Marlon James, the author, and also his editor. It's called Marlon and Jake Read Dead People. And it's basically just them, like, both praising and complaining about the books that they either love or hate that are by dead people, because they felt like it wasn't good for them to talk about authors who are still living. So I listened to one episode, I think it's the second episode. I listened to that earlier this week, and I really enjoyed it, because if you haven't read Marlon James, he's great. He's a Jamaican-American author, and his stuff is really, really interesting. Brian and I have both read A Brief History of 7 Killings by him.
Great book.
Yeah. And the episode I listened to, I chose it because in the description it said that they were talking about Jane Eyre and Wide Sargasso Sea. And I was like, hey, I know both of those. I can talk about that or listen to that and understand it. So that was good. And then also Brian and I watched Tiger King, but I'll let him delve deeper into that.
Oh, God. Yeah, Tiger King. I'll go ahead and just segue into that. I think, Danny, you're deep in Tiger King right now, too.
Will and I are mid episode 4 as we speak.
Oh, well, so we can't give anything away.
More Tiger King content in my evening I was like, it was like 6:15, and I was like, can we just watch some of it before the episode? I was like, I have got to know what's happening.
Yeah, it is so insane that, like, I think I've said this to multiple people, is you get to the first episode and already it's just like crazy enough where you're like, I'm satisfied with how crazy this is. And then every episode it's just like, oh yeah, that thing, that was nothing. Yeah. Here's a whole other thing. Like
it so artfully escalates from the first episode, but the first episode is insane. And so it's outrageous.
The thing is a couple people have been asking, like, would Tiger King be as popular if it didn't come out in the middle of this quarantine? And honestly, I think that it would. Like, I get that everybody is in, like, a more opportune position to binge through something like it, but I just think it's so crazy that the word of mouth would still be getting out and it would be watched to a similar degree.
Yeah.
The Twitter conversation was, like, not any more than, other, like, ridiculous cultural zeitgeists. Like Love is Blind, even. Like,
right.
I feel like it was kind of on the same... Everyone was just like, this show is outrageous on Twitter and other platforms. And, like, I get this reminded me of that. I feel like... I agree with you. I feel like this would absolutely be something people were into. I think it's weirder than a lot of things people usually watch that are out, even if it, like, it's weird even for something that is outrageous.
Yeah, and the thing is like, once the meme game also hits a certain point, which it has on Tiger King, it's all bets off. Like, once the meme game hits that top level, it's bound to be taking over culture. So that's been a thing. It's been nuts. Danny, can't wait to hear your thoughts when you get done with that. Still making my way along with All the King's Men on audiobooks when I take walks through secluded areas outside, keeping good social distance. I'll be listening to that. And then also The Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, I am loving. There was certain chapters already. I'm not like halfway through or anything. I'd say maybe a third, but like I laughed out loud, not because it was funny, but because it was just like one of those things that I told Jamie, it reminds me of Pinch On, where it's like you don't know what's going on for a large portion of the chapter until the very last page. Bringing back these bad memories for these two. But until the last page, and all of a sudden it ties everything together, and you're just like, oh my God, that's incredible. So that's been a fun thing. And then just on the side, we've been watching some older movies. I just watched Sound of Music. Or not Sound of Music, what the heck am I saying?
Singing in the Rain.
Singing in the Rain. Sound of Music. We were looking at all these older movies, and that was recommended.
What the heck am I saying?
But Singing in the Rain was just so good. And I know that it's like a classic and everything, but it was like unexpected that it was just one that you could tell was for its time moving along what movies could be. That's what it felt like to me. It's like early 50s, and yet everything that they're doing was like, whoa, I can't believe this is from the 50s. So that was cool. And then just listening to a lot of Brazilian jazz. I've been taking video guitar lessons, and all he keeps assigning me is Brazilian jazz songs. So I keep looking up top Brazilian albums of all time and just going deep on some Brazilian jazz. So lots of Luis Bonfá and Antonio Carlos Jobim. So that's been the deal. Danny, what have you been getting into?
Yeah, Tiger King, baby, is
baby
is on the watch list. Yeah, Will and I have been watching that. We started The Crown. Apparently, like, my media TV consumption is just you guys, like, 2 weeks later.
because we finished The Crown, I guess, since have we already finished it? We finished it, so.
You finished Mrs. Maisel, you finished The Crown, you finished Tiger King. That's what I'm doing this week.
Nice.
I finished Maisel, which I adored. And then we're watching The Crown, which, like, Will doesn't like watching. He's not a good binger. He doesn't like watching a ton of like.
We've never talked about Will, I think, on the pod. Who's Will?
Well, I mentioned him like very briefly. Will's my boyfriend. He's here for quarantine. We're hunkered down, working remotely together at my kitchen table. And he's been here for 2 weeks, and he's going to be here through April, like, presumably. I don't know. He might just live here now. We're not sure.
What a way to move in together.
So he lives in Chicago. We're long distance, and he has quasi moved in, and it's been good. We since we're long distance, we don't always get tons of time to just watch tons of shows together.
Yeah, you're binging all this stuff together.
So we're consuming a lot of content together, but even still, I love watching things. I can sit and watch things for hours, and unless it's a movie, he's not as interested in doing that. And so we'll watch The Crown, and I'll be like, "Do you want to watch 17 more?" And he'll be like, "Could we not?"
It's good to space out, because that show is covering, even up to this point, it's been over 2 decades or more.
Yeah, The Crown, I feel like you need to go slow.
With flashbacks, even, I think it's covering over 3 so far. So you're getting a lot of history in that amount of time.
Yeah, and you guys mentioned that one of the things you liked about it was being able to just look up all of the historical events, and I like doing that anyway with shows, but it really is we pause it every 20 minutes, and we're just did they get married? Who is he? Who are her kids? And it's really or ridiculous things happen, and you're just did that happen?
Yeah, definitely.
That really and it's very mostly historically accurate. So I really love doing that. We're 7 episodes in, and I also started. Will was done with TV for the night a few nights ago, and I was I want to watch something else. So I started Killing Eve a few nights ago, and it's written by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, the writer of Fleabag. And
I did not know that.
Oh, really?
Which is one.
I knew that.
That's actually
the
only
reason. Talked to us about that.
That's the only reason that I started watching. Aside from it stars Sandra Oh, who is oh my god, just so great. But also, part of the reason I even started watching it was because I knew that Phoebe Waller-Bridge was the writer, and so I really like it. It's basically a badass female assassin is being chased by an equally badass detective, and Sandra Oh is the detective, and it's really, or not officially, but she's she's chasing her, and it's really, I don't know, I really like it so far. I think I'm 4 episodes into that, so I recommend Killing Eve. I finished a few books. Speaking of Wide Sargasso Sea, I finished Wide Sargasso Sea, and I loved it. And I started Flannery O'Connor's short stories. So lots of media.
We were there when you bought that.
Yeah, I
now,
talked about it. So the book.
And I know, but that's what's so crazy is we were there when you bought it, and now it's just like that even seems like forever ago. But that's fun that you're diving deep.
Yeah, I'm trying to read one of at least one per day. They're just like good little like bite-sized like stories that like lightly traumatize you sometimes in the middle. Like it seems very like innocuous, and then all of a sudden at the end you're just like, what the fuck? And so yeah, I'm loving those.
Well, speaking of stories that lightly traumatize you,
a beautiful segue.
Let's get into.
I don't know if you guys got that choking noise on audio, but that was.
Speaking of stories that lightly traumatize you, let's get into the back half of our book for this week. This is the second half of Sing Unburied Sing. Jamie, take it away.
Well, Brian, we finished Sing Unburied Sing. I've been sitting here for the past 10, 15 minutes, however long we've been on, trying to figure out how to summarize the second half. Because I like prepare questions or talking points, but I always forget about the summary. So help me, please, because there's so much going on. Where we left off last time, we had just picked up Michael from jail.
And Richie.
And Richie the ghost. We picked him up too. Part of the second half is their journey back home, back to JoJo's grandparents' house. But a lot happens on that journey.
A lot of crazy things happen. It picked up so quickly at the beginning.
Yeah.
Right off the bat.
Yeah. So many insane things. They stop back at Al's house, which is Michael's lawyer, I'm pretty sure. Kayla is still sick for a while. Michael and Leonie like bang in the living room.
The police scene. Oh, you're missing the police scene. That was
I thought that was after Al.
That was like right off the.
I'm pretty sure it was after
the end of the first half, but they get pulled over, and it was just like
I was gonna get to
traumatizing.
That. I'm pretty sure that was after, because I thought that they went straight back to the grandparents' house after the pullover scene, but maybe I'm wrong. But they get pulled over by the cops while Michael is driving. He doesn't have a registered driver's license. So they switch seats while driving on the highway. They're both worried about the drugs that are in the car because Michael got them from Al.
No, they had that already.
No. Danny, can you help?
All right, yes, keep talking.
Well, regardless, yeah, Leonie swallows the meth and while they're getting pulled over and
yeah, so right before the cop comes up, she swallows a bag of meth, which is insane. She starts getting insanely high while the cop is interrogating them. She mentions that they're coming from Parchman, and he immediately doesn't trust that and pulls everybody out of the car, puts everybody except for Misty and Kayla in handcuffs. JoJo reaches into his pocket for the little bag that his grandfather gave him, which I don't even know that we mentioned last time.
No, it was still part of like a spiritual ritual to some degree of like channeling the power of natural things. And yeah, JoJo very innocently reaches in his pocket and all of a sudden gets a gun put to his head. It was crazy.
Yeah. So that all happens. The cop searches the car and doesn't find anything, and Leonie is like about to have a drug overdose. But he leaves. And then Michael does an at-home remedy of like milk and charcoal, makes her swallow it and vomit on the side of the road. And then finally they start driving home. when they get back into town, Michael wants to go to his parents' house, which we talked about last time. His parents, he is white and Leonie is black, and his parents don't approve. They're super racist. But he wants to take the kids there so that they can hang out with their grandparents, and that doesn't go well.
Yeah, it's because Leonie's parents weren't home, and so this was like a side thing that they were just like, let's go over there, and all warnings were there to be like, let's not do that.
Yeah, Leonie hasn't showered or changed her clothes since she vomited on the side of the road. Like, it's just a mess. So they go to Michael's parents' house. That blows up in their face for a lot of different reasons, but
his parents are... Well, his father is, like, atrociously racist, just, like, outwardly.
Yeah, he doesn't even try to hide it. He basically says that they're not welcome in that house. His mother tries to kind of be like, it's okay, they're our family. But he is just not accepting.
Yeah, so it calls Leonie a slur, which gets Michael and him into this huge brawl.
Yeah, they have a physical fight. Leonie takes the kids to the car. And then Michael finally comes out some time later, and they go back home. I
can confirm, by the way, that they stopped at Al's quickly for an evening, and then I think that they started, like, did they get stopped in the evening, or was it like during the day? I don't remember.
I think they slept at Al's house one night. Like,
yeah, they slept at Al's house, but then it's like the next paragraph. Jojo is like waking up, Michael's waking Jojo up in the car because the police have had their lights on. So they stop first, they sleep, they get cleaned up, and then as they're driving home, like the very next morning, they get pulled over.
Yeah.
Just with more vomit than after they've already cleaned up. And Leonie
so much vomit.
So much vomit everywhere.
So in all of that, also Richie's here, a ghost boy. And his presence feels like pretty ominous throughout the second half. At least from JoJo's perspective. Richie, like, his own narration, the chapters that he has, they seem kind of innocent. He just, like, is trying to figure out how he died, hoping that will help him cross over. But JoJo is very untrusting of him and tries to keep him away from Kayla. And eventually, there's a lot of, like, inner stuff here. But eventually, it gets to the point where JoJo, like, gives in and asks Pop about Richie, the end of Richie's story while Richie is there, which is what Richie wanted. He wanted him to ask Pop. Pop can't see Richie. And we learn the very traumatizing story about how Richie died, which includes him trying to run away with a rapist on the farm, trying to run away from Parchman, and then a lynch mob essentially going after the two of them, and Pop is the one that finds Richie, and Mercy kills him, essentially, because he's worried that if he doesn't, they will do much worse things to him, which he's already seen them do to the other man who ran away. So we learn that, like, right towards the end of section 2. And then we go into a scene where Ma'am is still very, very sick. She asks Leonie to help her, like, cross over, essentially, with some different kind of voodoo magic, is maybe how I'd describe that.
Yeah, with, like, herbs and, like, natural things and stuff. And
yeah. And Leonie's very hesitant to do that, but eventually gives in because Ma'am is very, very, like, clearly very sick and having some visions with Richie, sort of, like, traumatizing her. This is the part I was worried about. I don't even really know how to summarize this because there's so much going on.
Yeah, you can keep it pretty simple. We can get into it with discussions.
Yeah, there's so much. But at the end, right at the end, Ma'am dies. Richie is still here, and Leonie and Michael are basically not there, and like they're not living there anymore. They're very, very distant at the end. So yeah, that was a long-winded summary, and I'm sorry, I didn't know how to handle all of that.
No, there's a lot of important things that happen. Like I feel like the first half was almost like very, it was like half or a third as dense as like what happens in the back half, and it's just like there's a lot that is like almost crammed into the back half.
Yeah, like even what we had said during some of the discussions, that the first half seemed, when we were making those comparisons to As I Lay Dying, where it was like this journey, we almost got like that succinct story at the beginning, and then the back half just kind of went into its own thing a little bit, where it wasn't this simple thing of like, let's get Michael from jail. Then you start getting into like afterlife themes and all of these other supernatural things, and it really felt like a completely different story in certain cases where it didn't match the tone of the first half during significant sections of the back half.
Yeah, that was the first thing I wanted to talk about, actually, because I knew, Brian, that you already had thoughts about this. But the differences between the first and the second half, and like how that tone shifts. Do we like the tone shift? Like general thoughts on the second half?
Yeah, I'd just say that like when I started looking at it, I got kind of curious that, you know, we saw the discussion questions in the back of Sing Unburied Sing, the copy that we have, where that's where that comparison to As I Lay Dying was put into our heads.
Yeah.
But I don't actually know now if that was like a direct comparison that Jesmyn Ward wanted to make overall. And if that wasn't just like the publisher trying to put something for those discussions, because obviously that would start to be, you know, whoever's at the publishing house putting questions in the book and not Jesmyn Ward sitting like, hey, here's study guide questions. And maybe that's the case, that Jesmyn Ward wants to lead your discussion that way. But to me, it seemed like that was something that maybe somebody else had put in. And it seemed like a lot of those similarities dissipated in the back half, and it started to become, as I mentioned earlier, kind of like a whole new story. And especially when we get to the very, very end and you see the expansion of this ghost side of the story, that it just was like, had nothing to do with As I Lay Dying at that point, except for maybe some tie-ins to like Addie's potential communication to the family from the afterlife. But we're getting into like a whole forest of ghosts at the end here, and it's like, it seemed like it was wildly varied. And I teased it out on one of the Instagram posts from the last week when we started that account, but like I got more Lincoln and the Bardo vibes at the end.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, than I did for As I Lay Dying. And so that was kind of an interesting thing, that the tone shifted. I don't know that I completely always loved where the tone shift went, especially the end got kind of like, what is going on here? But I thought it kept it interesting, and I was glad to see it deviate, and it wasn't just like, oh, we're going to make a modern Mississippi version of As I Lay Dying, which I appreciated, and that made me wonder if that wasn't a Jesmyn Ward inclusion there.
I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely got like Lincoln and the Bardo vibes, like the last third at least. I also like am conscious of the fact that like trying to be aware of the fact that like we are like splitting these books in half arbitrarily. I mean, like we put a lot, I mean, we talk a lot about like the first half versus the second half, but like we just stop at a chapter that's convenient in the middle. And like it's like an important like just like thing to think about, because like I want to say that like the first half really did give me like as I lay dying vibes. like we, that was kind of in our heads already because we had talked about that discussion question. But I really didn't feel that at all starting in chapter 7 or wherever we started the second half from. And so, I mean, there are like some similarities that you can pull. I mean, I guess just like being in the deep South and like on a journey with, and somebody's dying, like, you can pull like some comparisons, but like, but overall, I mean, like, I really did feel at the end, like, or even in the times when Richie was there, like, it felt much more like Lincoln and the Bardo. And it actually made me think about on our first episode about this book, Jamie had mentioned that somebody that there were like some of the reviews mentioned like it being too like ghosty and people not liking the supernatural part. And I actually like something that I ended up not loving about this book is that it almost seemed, I don't want to like be too harsh, but like it almost seemed like somebody said like you should add a supernatural element like halfway through, and she was like, oh shit, like I gotta add a and like because it got very concentrated in the supernatural, like only like halfway through, like Richie showed up and like her, Ma'am was kind of already that kind of presence. But I don't know, I just kind of like, I wish, if anything, I wish she would have like included much more detail about that. Like it almost felt a little weird that like it touched so lightly on the supernatural. I felt like there were really no details about it at all.
Yeah, because like Given was only in special circumstances. He wasn't just like a part of the journey like Richie was in the back half. And that's the thing, is like we didn't even get introduced to Richie until that very final chapter before we made that break. And Richie was then a very significant presence to it. So like it did create even though you were saying it's like arbitrary, it is interesting that whenever we make these shifts like from first half to back half, that there often tends to be something that happens that does change the story a lot. And like Richie's presence did, just because it was consistent and not like Leonie maybe having something with her conscience, just like it didn't tiptoe that anymore. It was like, no, this is a supernatural phenomenon. Mm-hmm. It's not something that like you can maybe say she's hallucinating. This is like very firmly planted in the supernatural now, and it was very much significant, or very much more so significant in the back half for sure.
Yeah. So Danny, you didn't necessarily enjoy the ramping up of the ghost.
No. I did really, I enjoyed it. I wish that it would have been consistent throughout the whole book. Like I was bummed like in the second half because I was like, oh man, I feel like she just started talking about it halfway through, and like I would have liked for it to have been all the way at the beginning so that like we really could have like gone into more detail. I almost like kind of had a hard time understanding the point of including kind of like supernatural, like a supernatural element, because it was so lightly touched on. I just wish it would have been like, it would have gone more into detail and it would have been more of a presence. Because I was like, if you're just going to kind of do like, there's a ghost around, and then all of a sudden at the end there's like a bunch in like in like a whole forest of dead people. Yeah. Like it feels very like, what happens next? Like what? And that's I was just wanting more.
I think that was the most jarring thing for me, was like how much like the Richie thing I was on board with because I like the arc of Richie, but when we got to the last two chapters, it was just like it seemed like it made a third shift at that point where like Richie coming in was like that second shift. Or the second part, it was like a third part of the novel. So like once we get to the end, all of a sudden it's like, here's all of these people, and it was like such a different thing. And I'm not saying I dislike it, but it was kind of jarring how much it was just like, oh yeah, remember Richie and Given? Well, like here's 500 other ghosts out in the trees.
Should we like real quick summarize the very last like two scenes?
I mean, I don't even know how to summarize them, honestly. Like,
a lot of it was like Richie was just trying to, or he thought there was going to be some closure because he was finally able to leave with JoJo. But then once he gets there, once he gets in the car, he thinks he's going to get closure by talking to Pop and seeing how he died through Pop's description. Mm-hmm. But then it doesn't happen, and he somehow thinks now he's going to get to the other side through Mom. And Given ends up being like, no, don't, and all the family comes in, and we see all of their like kind of third eye that multiple members of the family can like see the supernatural or experience it, and then Given ends up going and Richie doesn't, which was kind of interesting to me, that I was like, what does Richie need and what did Given get?
Yeah, so this is something I was going to bring up a little bit later. But
wait,
I'm going to talk about it now. Yeah, Danny?
Can I just really quickly, we like don't have to talk about this at all for a long time, but like, can we talk about how the dog's name is Casper? Like, like what is that like as obvious as I think that it is, or am I just like being dense? Like, is Casper the ghost too new to like be like harkened back to?
I also noticed that, but I don't know. Is it? I don't know.
I'll have to look it up or something. Yeah. I just like thought it was very funny, like where there's all this talk about ghosts, and then all of a sudden, like there's just a dog named Casper, and I was like, oh, there are so many names. You could name the dog. I don't know. It feels significant. Yeah. Anyway.
So the thing I was gonna bring up a little bit later, I felt the way both of you feel about the last two chapters when I first read them. And then I read this article online, and I like really, really enjoy the last two chapters now, and like I'm still confused by them.
Jamie's memoir, and then I read this article.
In the New Yorker.
Okay, so this is from the LA Review of Books. I found it not because I was searching for an article about Sing Unburied Sing, but because I was stalking my favorite English professor from college, and she wrote this article. So, it's called The New Black Gothic, if you want to read it, on LA Review of Books. And that is something I wanted to talk about, of like Southern Gothic and how this plays into that tradition, because we've talked about that this season already. But she frames talking about Sing Unburied Sing and comparing it to a lot of other pieces of media that are have like kind of similar themes, like This Is America by Donald Glover, Childish Gambino. But she starts it off by talking about that scene from Sing Unburied Sing with the ghosts in the trees. And something that she pointed out that I didn't quite grasp, I think, when I read it, was that all of the ghosts, as their like litany of grief is coming to JoJo, all of the ghosts are describing like the very, very, very violent ways in which they died. And her argument kind of in the article is that this scene is a discussion of how Black Americans specifically are like weighted down by the violent history of their lives in America. And so like the idea that she brings up is that Given is only able to get through to the other side because he does it with Ma'am. Like he grasped onto her essentially, and that's her when she's talking about like, I thought it would be my son and not Richie who's standing there trying to get in with her. So I think Richie was trying to like use this innocent person who's dying in an innocent, natural way to get through. And he can't, because she can only take one person, sort of. Which I thought was just a really interesting reading of it, because I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely recall the violent ends to it, and especially like the violent ends to all of the lives of those that were in the trees. And it does make sense in the context of like, you know, when we actually get a full story of Richie and see, what he went through, and then also see the way Given's death came about through a racist incident. Like, it does give some context to it, and I think that, like, that relation wasn't that far off, and I'm not saying that I disliked it or those themes of it, because that was something that, like, was said and that I picked up on, is the violent parts. I just think that, like, as Danny had kind of mentioned, that just from the fact that it came on so suddenly, like, if that was a significant theme to be built on, I kind of wish that, like, those stories would have been brought forth, or at least the presence, or that we could have known of the presence of the others earlier, to know that this was like a common thing and not just people that were related to this family in particular, if that makes sense.
I get that. I think that,
but I do like that. Like, that's a great, like, point of, like, why that was specified, that they had violent ends, especially in the context of the book. And I don't, like, dislike the last few chapters. I just thought that it happened so suddenly that it was like, by the way, here are hundreds, if not thousands, of others so quickly.
Yeah, I felt really overwhelmed by that at first also. And I when I read it, I told you, I was like, I feel like I need to reread the last two chapters.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed them when I read them, but I still was like, this is a book that I need to sit with for a second, because I don't fully understand everything that happened. I guess I just, like...
I'd like to read that article.
Yeah, I'll send it to you guys.
If you are at home listening to this podcast, pause it and read this article, because it is saying everything we are saying, just, and, like, in a better way, and it's much more eloquent, and also, like, is just, you should read it. This
also,
paragraph
she's better.
is great. The paragraph is great. It's much better than the way that we are talking about it right now. But I mean, yeah, it's almost like she even says, like, it's almost like the point is that it wasn't, like, as fleshed out as maybe, like, people would want it to. I agree that I wish the transition maybe wouldn't have been so sudden, but the point is that, like, that kind of violence is, like, has never gone away for Black Americans, and also, like, it's a part of everyday life, and it lives at home with them, she says, like, in their tree, and, like, that. Whew, yeah, go read the article.
Yeah, everyone read that article. Cherie Marie Harrison, she's great.
I think Danny was just reading that while I was over here, like...
Yeah, Jamie said it's on LA Review of Books, and Brian just turns, and I'm like, I already have Chrome open, like, searching the article. Yeah. I was already reading
So now I definitely need to read it. But the one thing I will say, though, is, like, the supernatural element overall, I don't have a problem with in general, because... I alluded to it, but, like, Richie's arc in particular was the biggest payoff of the book to me, because there was a lot with the other characters that stayed exactly the same. Like, at the end, we didn't get significant improvement of Leonie and Michael. They still were seeing Al only home every once in a while. But, like, with Richie... I specifically teared up at the part where, like, he was there to hear his own story. And experience it in that way, where, if it would have just been JoJo being like, hey, Pop, you don't tell me about this thing, like, it still would have been affecting, but seeing the person there understanding what happened and how much it affected Pop, though it was done with good intentions, but then still Richie feeling grief about it anyway, it just made me tear up, and it was, like, to me, the most affecting thing, to me, the biggest payoff, and that I don't think that would have been possible without it being done in this supernatural way, in my opinion. I think that made that moment more powerful, that Richie could be there to experience it too, so...
Yeah, it almost added a really interesting, an interesting layer to, or, like, a very, like, almost, like, traumatizing, like, poignant layer to, like, the concept of, like, mercy killings. Like, because like I know I haven't actually read Beloved, but I know the premise of it, and like you know, it feels like a really poignant, interesting way for Richie to learn. It almost is like you know, you get a little bit of like solace in the fact that like when that happens, like the person dies and hopefully doesn't know what's going on, but like it's much more painful to read it like as though the person is like watching it happen, or like hearing it, like remembering it, or having it told to them. And it was like particularly heart-wrenching to like read Richie learning that about the way that he died.
Yeah, especially him being the same age that he was when he died, and that like coming back to the forefront of how he even interacts with JoJo. I think even more so highlights how young he was to face an atrocity like this, for, you know, his outcome being something so much more significant than what like he's even in jail for in the first place. And the fact that we just continue to see him as this young kid and have him act as this young kid, that when you do hear it, having seen him as the young kid, it just, yeah, it I think it adds a lot in that sense. So I don't want to harp on the supernatural so much that it makes it sound like it was like unjustified, and I still think that it played a significant role in a really powerful way.
Yeah, no, I thought it was great. I have a question, Brian, just because you mentioned this, but Brian and I both mentioned that we cried while reading the end of this. Did you cry because of Richie or because of what Pop said to JoJo?
I think just Pop's whole thing, that like, you know, just hearing that he had this care for Richie, and he was doing something with good intentions, but like was placed in such a position from the society he was in, that like that the best thing that he could have done, the best thing that he was forced into because of the way society was at that time, was still something so traumatizing that he can't get over it himself. He doesn't even seem to feel that much better about it, even when considering the alternatives. And he knows what those were with Blue, the guy that Richie ran away with outside of the jail. And just the fact that like it highlighted all of these moments in his life, it just like played from that moment to when he is the grandfather to these kids. It just was like, when he was married, that didn't help. When he saw these kids, that didn't help. When he interacted with his grandkids, that didn't help. It was just something that stuck with him forever. When, you know, you see it from an outside perspective, you're like, that was the best thing that he could have done. So just seeing that haunt him for something that he, like, again, was good intentions and he had no other choice with, that was just kind of devastating.
Yeah. The part that I teared up at, which I thought that we were on the same page about this when we talked about it earlier this week, but it was right after that where he says, like he's talking about Richie and how that stayed with him forever, and he says, when Given died, I thought I'd drown in it, drove me blind, made me so crazy I couldn't speak. Didn't nothing come close to easing it until you came along. Like, that's the line that got me, where he was like talking to JoJo about how JoJo has eased his pain, which is like such a theme throughout the rest of the novel, of JoJo like being the person for the adults in his life, which is so painful. And it's also just like so nice for him to get that love from an adult when we've seen this whole journey with Leonie and Michael. So that was the part that made me cry. Speaking of Leonie, Brian, you touched on this for a little bit, but we talked a lot about her character development in the first half, and she doesn't change much. Did we have any hope for her in the second half, or did you guys expect her to end up where she did?
I think I had a lot more empathy for her going like through the second half. Empathy for her like situation, less like I don't know. I feel like I can be upset with her for the way she treats JoJo and Kayla, and also like feel empathy for the situation that, you know, she was in. But, you know, it was really hard to read, like, her being, like, very vindictive at JoJo. Like, there was a point where you're reading from her point of view, and it's right at the beginning of the second half. JoJo is cleaning himself off. It's probably vomit or something.
If you're uncertain in this book, it was probably vomit.
Probably vomit. And he's like washing himself off, and as he's doing it, he is like remembering or thinking about how he's insecure about like his body a little bit, just like his like still kind of pudgy, like childlike, like teenage body. And Leonie, or maybe he mentions it earlier, but then you see Leonie like makes a comment about like, make sure you clean,
starts
like,
roasting him
between them rolls, and like she sees that it hurts him, and like also he's her child and he's like 12, and those were the parts where I was like, all right, she's crossed over from like not being like a sympathetic character, and is more just like, she's just like trying, she's jealous of her 12-year-old, and it really started to piss me off. Like, I don't know, I feel like you have to step up in some way, like as a parent, especially because she like chose to have the child, like when she talked to her mom about it, I think, right? Like she got pregnant, and her mom was like, would you like me to do something about it? And Leonie said no. And, you know, I'm not saying that as like a 16-year-old, she like had all of the information that she needed in order to make that decision. But like, I don't know. It was frustrating to read her for sure. I don't know that I had a lot of hope for her. I don't think that I had a lot of hope for her even at the end of the first half. I'm not like wholly surprised that she ended up kind of being the way that she was, but I did feel the most sympathy for her when she was dealing with having to like help her mom cross over. When her mom asked her to do that, I really felt a lot of sympathy for her. That was like, I don't know, that was the part where I like my sympathy for her peaked.
Yeah, no, I agree with that like I don't think I had much hope for her at the end of the first half anyway. I think the thing I was holding out hope for was with Michael getting involved. I was thinking that maybe that would be something that would help ease the pain that she's feeling, whatever, you know, that may be. There's a lot of factors as to what pain she's feeling, but I thought that Michael would be some sort of a remedy, hopefully. And then once he got back in the picture in the car, and, you know, she's still almost exactly the same, if not somewhat eased by Michael being a little bit of he had a little bit of a lighter touch as a parent overall. Not much, because he still had significant moments where like he even had beat Kayla at the table later, but just the fact that he had somewhat of a lighter touch, I was like, okay, well, maybe this is gonna be something that like this can be a whole thing for Leonie, like her family's back together, and it just didn't seem like even when he got back in the picture that much had changed. I think I lost most hope at that point, but still never stopped feeling sympathy for her because of the situation with Given, with her drug addiction. But yeah, like Danny said, just these moments where she's like actively antagonistic, that's a big tell that, you know, it wasn't necessarily from like her being high, for instance. It was just like coming from a darker place than that, even because it was something that she was willingly doing. But yeah, of course, when she's with her mom and like still wants to help in whatever way that is, unfortunately it's to do some mystical ritual to bring on her mother's death by her request. You know, like that's a very sympathetic thing. But yeah, overall, like it was just hard to feel hope for Leonie, because it didn't seem like there was a lot that could change her at that point.
Yeah,
we're kind of running out of options for that.
I feel like I had like the tiniest glimmer of hope in that like second to last chapter where she is helping her mom.
Yeah.
And And I thought maybe that would give her, like, when I was reading it, maybe that would give her some closure on Gibbon, like, seeing him cross over. But clearly it didn't.
Yeah.
Like, she just spirals even further. She seems really upset by the fact that he is, like, fully gone at that point.
Yeah, which is unfortunate that it, like, then even seems like he was somewhat of an anchor. And I guess that's playing out through the whole novel anyway, but, like, given showing up when she's high of, like, a decision that she's actively making to remind her that she's making this decision, like, he is significant, like, as we had kind of talked about, he's, like, her conscience without actually being literally that, but, like, he plays into that a bit. But yeah, with that gone, it seems like that net for her is also gone, and it does make sense that she spirals further without that reminder every time.
Yeah.
So.
All right, guys. Want to move into final thoughts? How'd you like the book overall?
I'll go. I really like. I think I enjoyed the second half much more than I enjoyed the first half. But like I said earlier, I wish that the first half maybe would have been a little more like the second half in terms of just like maybe density or how concentrated all of the action was. Although like, you know, it was very effective, like all of that action happening in the second half. I just kind of wish that like the supernatural kind of like elements would have been a little more detailed in the first half. But I loved the way that she wrote it. I loved that it was from the perspectives of different characters. I really liked reading about just like a touch of kind of like Louisiana like esque like or Deep South esque like voodoo like magic. I liked that element a lot. And also just, yeah, the way that she told the story of like Richie kind of to him as a ghost, I really enjoyed as well. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. Does she have any other book? Does she have other books? I want to read them.
Yeah, she has a few others. Another one that won the National Book Award as well, which is called Salvaged the Bones.
Okay, yeah.
I have coworkers who really, really love Salvage the Bones. I need to read it. Brian?
Yeah, I think it was just a jarring experience to get to the back half because, anybody that listened to the second half of As I Lay Dying, that was like a surprise hit for us. Where we all enjoyed that a lot more than we were expecting to. And it was this road novel. It was one that Jamie, even in the middle of the episode, was like, I think this is like a 5-star book for me. And it was like coming off of the high of that and then having the expectation, which again, it's like our own fault for like having the expectation in the first place, but like expecting another like road novel like that and exploring similar things where like I said, it seemed like that kind of ended in the first half, and when the second one happened, I was like, what's going on here? And I think I liked the first half better because I like had the expectation of it like fulfilling that road novel role, and I really liked their journey and how it helped characterize who each of them were. But that being said, getting into the second half, the scene with Richie was still the most affecting part of the book, that it was worth it to push through. Obviously we're doing it for the podcast, but just to get to that and just like get a story like that was really incredible in the back half. And so I enjoyed that a lot. Wasn't like an overall hit for me like As I Lay Dying was, but I definitely would want to revisit the last couple chapters again, especially after reading that article that you had mentioned, because I think there was a lot of complexity in there that, sometimes you miss just on the prospect of like reading to the end. And with that peak coming for me with Richie's story with still 2 chapters left, I think I kind of like blazed past the next two, and those obviously have as much, if not more, importance in the overall story. That I just feel like I did myself a disservice to not pay attention more to that. But overall, I did like it, and I do enjoy novels that there's not a need to wrap everything up with a nice bow. Like, I thought that it made total sense that Leonie and Michael went back to the way that they were. I think it would have been a disservice for those two to have a happy ending to some degree, especially considering the history of both of them and their actions. So I think that overall it was a great book. That I just think having the expectation of what we had read before also did it a disservice, because it definitely stands alone. I think that that's something that I definitely saw, that it stands on its own from As I Lay Dying, and I wouldn't necessarily go to somebody else to give them that expectation if I told them about this book. I would want them to go into it very fresh.
Yeah, I get that. I enjoyed like being able to compare them throughout, especially thinking of it like in the Gothic tradition. I think it's interesting to look at like how that tradition has changed in modern day, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to compare it to As I Lay Dying. I really enjoyed it. I think I liked the first and the second half equally. Like, I just like enjoyed the whole thing. There wasn't a chapter where I was like, oh, I'm kind of bored with this right now.
Yeah, I will say it did keep my attention a lot. It flowed very fast. There was never a lull for me at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was absolutely engaged the entire time. I finished this book like 2 days after we finished after we recorded the last episode. I mean, also quarantine helps with that. But like, I was so like, I really wanted to like, I was excited to like finish recording and start reading it again, because I was really engaged the whole time.
I think that that's a high compliment. Like, to circumvent everything else, is that like it was a very readable book for sure, all the way.
Yeah, definitely very, very engaging the whole time. It was a book that made me. And this was true before I read my professor's article, but also very true after it. It was a book that like made me want to sit down and write an essay about it. Like, that's how I deconstructed books in college, and that's how this made me feel again, of being like, I need to sit down and take some notes and figure out what's going on, because I liked it. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. I definitely will read more from Jesmyn Ward.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, because also this book was very divisive. I'll just say this quickly, since we're getting to the end here, but this was a semi-divisive on BookTube, at least with people that I follow. But a lot of people across the board had such great things to say about Salvaged the Bones. So I would definitely be interested to read that, especially given the fact that like a lot of people that read this was off the back of, again, another book of hers that won a National Book Award, and that was like the big notoriety, original part of the notoriety of her career. Mm-hmm. So I would be curious to read that and see how that compares to this. Yeah.
Well, cool, guys. Thanks for talking with me.
Good choice, James.
Thanks.
That's the second episode in a row that Tiniest said that. Good choice, James.
Good choice, James.
So yeah, with that, that is the second episode of our Quarantine with Books, as per Danny. And so that means, I'm assuming next time, because in Kansas City we are in a 30-day stay-at-home order, which we pretty much were anyway, but it's very official till the end of April. So it sounds like we'll be back in another quarantine episode for next time, but that's going to be the start of the third book of the second season, and that's Danny's.
And now for something completely different. We'll be reading Rabbit Run by John Updike.
I'm so curious, because
I don't know what it's gonna be like.
Well, the thing that I saw is like, it's just one of those that, you know, there's a lot of novels from the mid 20th century that like it was very notable because it like bucked the norm but didn't age well, I think is kind of the vibe that I've been seeing, which I still like reading those because like it's fascinating to see what was like something that would buck the norm that like maybe seems normal now, because I think it's just good for context of like, really, this was something that was like scandalous. Like
yeah, it also like from what I've read, like in case you just like want to be prepared, you guys, and also you guys listening,
finger guns through the computer.
Listening, it's very like Death of a Salesman vibes. Like,
I have not read that.
Like the man, I read it recently. Well, semi-recently. It was your book, and it's very just like 60s. Like a man is like trapped in a loveless, sad marriage in a boring sales job. Like I guess every man in the 60s was. And,
that's the 60s.
That's like the exact like feel that I get when I like read the summary. So but I honestly like, but beyond that, I really have, aside from like reading about like how John Updike was just like a blatant misogynist and like kind of a sleazy writer, like I don't have any other preconceived notions. So
I know, and that's the thing that keeps getting brought up. So I'm curious to finally like get into it because I've never read any of his. I just want to know what the deal is. So yeah, we will be back with that next time. And then we'll have to figure out what we're doing for book number 4, how we're going to organize that, because the Rona has really been...
Yeah, seems like we might not have a guest.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. You can double FaceTime. We can get a nice Zoom call going.
We'll do a Zoom call
for this fourth book. So anyway, whose turn is it to scat? Who's trying to scat us out?
I think it's Danny.
Well, I think Jamie needs to do her Skype ringtone as the call.
The nice FaceTime scat.
Yeah.
It was FaceTime scat.
We will catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye.